All right, so this video is talking about files and file manipulation and file use in Linux. So these are the basics of how do you interact with files through the command prompt. So let me go ahead and open up a terminal. And again, I am root at Kali. And if I cd into /home, and we see the only user that exists on this machine is root. You may remember in a previous video we created a new user, but remember we're using the live CD, so every time we reboot it, gone, wiped out. So just to have fun, let's do user add -m dummy. And now when we type ls, we see that dummy exists there, and I'm going to change directory into dummy and type ls, and there's nothing. But if I do ls-a, we see there's the basic run control files that are automatically created for any user. All right, let's do this. Let's create a couple of files. We create files using touch junk.txt. No jokes about touching my junk, right? Touch stuff.txt and touch this.jpg. And if I do ls, now it shows me those different files. Now, question, did I actually just create a JPEG file? No. Right? I just created blank files with nothing in them, and I can give them any extension I want. So TXT, JPEG, DOC, it doesn't matter. Linux, this is an important distinction between Linux and Windows. Linux does not care what the file extension is. Linux only cares about the actual file type itself. How do I find out what type of file it is? I type the word file and then the name of it. So if I type in file junk, it tells me it's an empty file. If I do file this.jpg, it tells me it's an empty file. So Linux actually checks the header of the file, which is internal data, to see what type it is. It doesn't care about the file extension. You can give anything, any extension you want. Now what happens if I do ls-l? Well, we see the permissions, which we talked about the last time, right? So the permissions are right here. So this first special bit doesn't say anything because it's just a regular file. And the owner has read and write permissions, the group has read permissions, and then the rest of the world has read permissions. The owner is root, and the group is root. Even though these files are created underneath dummies directory, I am logged in as root when I created them, so they belong to me as root. If I wanted to change that, I would do chown and dummy junk.txt, and now if I do ls-l, we see that junk.txt is owned by dummy. If I wanted to change the group, I would use group, and I think users is the default group. And now when I do ls-l, you see junk.txt is owned by dummy and part of the users group, right? Suppose I wanted to rename a file, right? I wanted to rename that. To do that in Linux, I actually move it without moving the directory that it's in. So I would do mv for move, the name of the file, junk.txt, and I'll call it notfunny.txt. Now when I do ls-l, we see notfunny.txt owned by dummy, part of the users group. Make sense so far? What if I wanted to make a file hidden? Do you remember from the last video how you do that? Remember, in Linux, hidden files are just regular files where the name starts with a period. So if I want to say I want to make stuff.txt a hidden file, I just do mv stuff.txt dot stuff.txt. Now when I do ls-l, you see stuff.txt is no longer there. But if I do ls-la for long and all, we can see stuff.txt still right here, still owned by root, same permissions, same everything. Suppose I want to make a directory. How do I? So we make a new file with touch. Actually, detail here. Touch does not create a file. Touch changes the timestamp on a file, and if it doesn't exist, it will create it just to change the timestamp. For example, if you look at the timestamp for this.jpg, it is July 17th, 1727. If I do touch this.jpg, now when I do ls-l, you see that the timestamp is now 1731, right? Because that is the current time. So the time is adjusted by using touch. And if it's empty, then it creates it. But what if I want to create a directory? How do I create a directory? mkdir, right? Make directory. So I'm going to make a directory called tmp. And I type ls, and now I see notfunny.txt, this.jpg, and tmp. If I do ls-l, we see that tmp has that special D character, right? The D switch right in the beginning. If I want to see the contents of tmp, I will type ls tmp, and I just typed tm and then hit tab to autocomplete. I cannot emphasize this enough. Use autocomplete. It will save your life. Well, not literally, but it will save your life. And I hit enter, and we see it doesn't display anything because temp is empty. But if I do ls-a tm and then tab, it shows the dot and dot dot, which are in every directory. Let me create something in there. I'm going to do touch tmp this.txt, and now when I do ls tmp, we see that the file this.txt exists in there. Does anybody remember when I do touch temp/this.txt, what type of path is that? Remember, there are two types of paths. That is a relative path, and really the most correct thing to do would be to do touch./tmp this.txt, because the // means my current directory. I could also do the same thing by doing touch/home dummy tmp this.txt. So those three different ways of doing it all achieve the same results. It's just the first two is using a relative path. The last one is using the full path. You really need to get into your head relative versus full paths. It comes up a lot in Linux. All right. Suppose I want to move this.jpg into the temp directory. Well, that's where that move command comes in. Move this.jpg tmp. Let me do it correctly and do /tmp. Now, at this point, I can execute this command. And if I do ls./tmp, we see this.jpg got moved. I could also do mv notfunny.txt /tmp, and I could rename it at this point if I wanted to. I'm going to change it back to junk.txt. Right? And now when I do ls.tmp, we see junk.txt, this.jpg, and this.txt. So all my files are now underneath the temp directory. I can also copy files. What do you think I use to copy files? CP, right? So let me go into the temp directory, right? And I will do cp this.jpg, and then I'm going to copy it .. What's that going to do? Remember, what is .. That's the parent directory. So now, if I cd .. I move up one, and you can actually see that in my prompt here, right? I went from temp to dummy. And now if I type ls, we see this.jpg. I copied it up one, but it also still exists inside the temp directory. Make sense? So, what are the important things about file manipulation that we learned today? Right? Creating a file using touch, creating directories using make directory, moving files using MV, which also allows us to rename files, copying files using CP. Two more things: deleting files and directories, and globbing. Right? Those are the two last things you need to know. So let's say that I want to delete this.jpg. The command for deleting something is rm for remove. So I'm going to do rm this.jpg, and now when I type ls, this.jpg is gone. To delete a directory, the correct command is rmdir, right? But when I do that, it says failed to remove temp, the directory isn't empty. So rmdir will not remove a directory if there is stuff inside it. So let's look at what's inside temp again. All right, so I have 3 files inside temp. I need to delete all of them before I can use rm. So I'm going to, before I can use rmdir. So I have 3 files inside my temp directory. I cannot use rmdir until those files are gone. So I can use rm./temp and then choose each file individually. I can also use globbing to indicate multiple files at a time. So I can use star.txt, and that will, the star is a glob. It will match anything. So anything that starts with anything and ends in .txt will be matched by that command. And when I hit enter, now when I type in ls./temp, we see only this.jpg remains, right? Because junk.txt and this.txt both matched that file glob that we did there, right? And then I can do rm./temp this.jpg and remove that. And now when we look at the tmp directory, it is empty. So now when I use rmdir, it doesn't grumble at me, which means it is gone, and I've deleted everything. So I can delete things using rm or rmdir. That is all we're going to talk about with remove. There are some more advanced things you can do with remove right now, but we don't want to learn anything that can hurt ourselves yet. So that's everything you need to know about creating files, moving files, copying files, deleting files, and directories, right? If you have any questions, let me know.